Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Ellen. I'm the co-executive director at Hollywood Fringe. My pronouns are she, they. For a quick visual description, I'm a white woman. I am wearing a black oversized t-shirt. I have long, wavy brown hair, and I have bangs. And my background is blurred tonight. Welcome to tonight's anti-racism panel. Thank you so much for being here with us. I want to acknowledge that this is being live streamed and recorded. There will be moments where the recording won't catch in the breakout rooms or and things like that, and I will navigate both our YouTube viewers through that as well as our people here in the room. Um, I also wanted to let everybody know that there's going to be a survey at the end for questions and feedback, but Lois is on the chat to talk if anything comes up for anybody at any moment and they just need to talk to somebody. We have our other co-executive director at Hollywood Fringe, Lois, who's there to chat with everyone. Um, Before we begin, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement recognizes a formal statement that recognizes and honors the indigenous peoples of the land we presently reside and or work on. Hollywood Fringe acknowledges that we are on the unceded lands of the Gabrielino Tongva and Chumash peoples. Our statement serves as a practice as we commit as an organization to furthering our connection to the indigenous communities past, present, and emerging. If you want to learn more about our land acknowledgement, but also resources for your own education about our area, we have a link, hollywoodfringe.org/land to learn more. Why are we here? So centering anti-racism practices through an understanding of our individual and collective personal stake in ending white supremacy and creating truly radically accessible and inclusive spaces in American theater is our goal. And this is just one of the steps to getting there. So thank you so much for being a part of that. What's going to happen? We're going to do some introductions to some terms. We're going to talk about the characteristics of white supremacy. Then we're going to have some shareback about a personal stake, do some little writing on our own personal stake, have a breakout room conversation about that, and then a formal panel discussion that'll last about 45 minutes at the end there about how it all relates back to the rehearsal room. So before I get started, I'd love to introduce our one of our panelists who's going to get us started in a grounding moment. And then we'll introduce our other panelists as well. Olivia, could you ground us tonight?
Yes, can everyone see me? I didn't realize my camera was on. I have self-view turned off. Great. All right, welcome everyone. Hello. Um, I'm Olivia, and let's just all take a deep breath in together through the nose. And just gently let that out through your mouth. Do another deep breath in through your nose. Soft exhale. Deep breath in through your nose. Let this one out through your nose. One more in through your nose. Fill all the way up to the top. And as you exhale slowly through your nose, try to push all of the air out of your lungs. Get way to the bottom of your breath. Push, 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 so that your next inhale is buoyant and effortless. We'll take a few breaths deep through the bottom of our lungs and long, slow, sustained exhales through the nose. On your next inhale, try to originate your breath from just below your navel. Feel your belly balloon as you inhale, fill this cavity. Exhale, feel it soften. Now try to increase the awareness of your breath so that you're expanding behind your low belly and your back. Feel this expansion here at the bottom of your breathing cavity. And release. We'll do that again. Base of your belly expands, and now your side ribs, your low back, and gentle contraction as you breathe out. Again, in through your low belly, back, side ribs, and now maybe your chest expands. As you exhale, chest, side ribs, low back, belly soften. Do 3 more breaths like that, expanding all 6 sides of this box in our center cavity. This in yoga practice is called a Dirga pranayama. This is a 360-degree breath. It's good for stabilizing your digestion and creating a sense of safety. 2 more breaths just on your own. If you closed your eyes, feel free to gently open them, bring some light back in, and come back to the room.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Do you want to also start by sharing out with your name, pronouns, a visual description, and also how you got involved in Hollywood Fringe?
Yeah. So my name's Olivia Finnegan. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with pretty long reddish brown hair that's in half up, half down. I've got front facing bangs, a red cardigan, black t-shirt, and a blurry white background in the corner of my couch. Um, I got involved with Hollywood Fringe. I stumbled into a production at the first ever Fringe in 2010 because I was obsessed with the Diary of Anne Frank and there was a production going on. And so that was my first introduction to Fringe, but I didn't know I was at a festival. And then I got in college, I started doing one-woman shows, and I was like, what's the best avenue for that? And that got me into my very first Fringe I performed at was Perth. And then I started doing productions at the Reykjavik Fringe Festival in Iceland. Spent 6 years involved with that festival. 5 of those 6 years I was producing, running, supporting, at one point directing that festival. Um, Fringe, you wear a lot of hats. I wore every hat imaginable. And I'm from LA, so when I moved back to my home, of course, the natural next progression was to be involved in Hollywood Fringe. So here I am.
Thank you so much for sharing. I wanted to ask if Rosie could share in next.
Yes. Hi, my name is Rosie Glenn Lambert. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with usually shoulder length hair, but it's back in a clip right now, so it's right above my ears. I'm wearing the pink lipstick I wear every single day. I'm in a sort of like black tank top with white stripes on the side. And I'm in this really disgusting blue room. And and there's a yeah, the walls are like this like really awful shade of blue, and then there's a there's a TV behind me and 2 white doors. I am a director. I'm the artistic director of the Attic Collective, and I got involved. My very first Fringe was in 2015. I did a show called Dead Dog's Bone, and I have since done several shows. I directed a show called The Last Croissant. I directed a show called Iphigenia and Spot, and then this past Fringe, I directed a show called And Her Children, and I also produced a show called Hedda Gobbler a couple years ago. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Rosie. Thanks for sharing. And last but certainly not least, Socks, do you mind sharing out?
Of course, I'm happy to be here. My name is Socks Whitmore, socks like the things on your feet. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am a white, non binary person with short brown hair wearing my favorite beanie. It is green from Meow Wolf and a black t shirt. And my Zoom background is a big purple flower with my pronouns above my head in green. And my very first Fringe was in 2019 when I performed in Michael Gordon Shapiro's The Bully Problem. And since then, I've been in Fringe not just as a performer, but as a producer with the Trans Conversation Project, as an awards judge last year for the inaugural Joy Who Lived Trans Award. And I'm also a theater critic who is in LA all year round, but I especially love to see shows during the Fringe and try and give them some pro bono coverage.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So next, we're just going to start going through a couple of definitions of some terms. We're going to first center ourselves in what we're kind of talking about today, go through the definition of those terms, and then talk a little bit about the characteristics of white supremacy. And so I'm going to share my screen, but it's going to take me a second because it's... Okay. Sorry, I had to open it in a new tab. Now it's working. All right. We are here. Some questions we'll address in the coming moments is why are we centering white folks in this conversation, which I know is probably a burning question for a lot of people here. What is white supremacy? What is anti-racism? What is my role in ending white supremacy? And what does this have to do with theater? Um, I also wanted to ground this in saying that our code of conduct applies in all Hollywood Fringe spaces. And if you have been a part of our Hollywood Fringe events, you've heard our spiel there. But we're going to drop it in the chat. And what I really wanted to remind people is that it's a great resource for sharing with your cast the kind of ethos that is expected to participate at Hollywood Fringe. In our code of conduct, we don't only have rules about what you can and cannot do, but also an ethos that we all hope to share in this space. But to center ourselves in today's conversation, we wanted to go through some community agreements, and I would love if our panelists could popcorn themselves reading one bullet point area at a time. I know that some have sub-bullet points. That's part of that same bullet point group there, and then pass to the next person.
Sure. Our first one is be curious, open, and respectful. Let's call in members, not out.
No one knows everything. Together we know a lot. Let people finish their thoughts completely before moving on to the next topic.
Use I statements. Can you help me understand blank? I don't understand, and steer clear of I feel.
Listen and share space. It is just as important for us to hear out our fellow community members as it is for us to speak up or be seen.
We speak in draft in these rooms, meaning we are vulnerable and can ask questions about things we don't know about. This is a learning space.
Speak from your own experience, not the I have a friend mindset.
Everything said here is to be presented as a learning and reflection opportunity. You do not have to be perfect here.
If we want to share information or resources outside of this space, let's ask permission from the speaker before doing so.
When in doubt of yourself, feel free to reach out to a staff member via DM.
Thank you all. I also just wanted to shout out some resources we're going to be dropping into the chat and going over. The LA Theater Standards is a robust document. We're going to go over just some definitions from that document today, but it is actually a list of standards that you can enact to uphold anti-racism in your production and in the rehearsal room. And so it's one of the best resources we have here in Los Angeles. And we really thank the LA Theater Standards Committee and everybody for creating this document that we all get to use. And actually, Hollywood Fringe is one of the organizations that uses that to kind of assess our equity each year. And we find it to be a very, very useful tool. A characteristics of white supremacy is another resource we're going to be going through. It's a great starting point for reading into white supremacy and developing your own personal stake in ending white supremacy culture in and outside of the rehearsal room. So some of these definitions we're going to go through, we're just going to breeze through these. So as we talk about them, you have a connection to what they mean. And I'm going to ask our team to popcorn again.
Cool. The first one is AAPI. AAPI is an acronym for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, sometimes used interchangeably with APA, which is Asians and Pacific Americans, or API, Asians and Pacific Islanders.
Anti-racism, to put simply, is the active and ongoing practice of recognizing and combating racism, whether on an individual, institutional, or systemic level. It must be active, as it isn't enough to not be racist. We must be proactive and intentional in our dismantling of the racial inequities all around us, and it must be ongoing because anti-racism is not a permanent identity, but rooted in what we are doing or not doing, supporting, expressing, etc. in each moment.
BIPOC. BIPOC is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, which gained popularity in 2020 as a way to center the unique experience of Black and Indigenous erasure within America's history. While language is constantly evolving and there is no one term that everyone agrees on, for example, some prefer BIPOC, some prefer POC, some prefer people of the global majority, etc.
EDI. EDI is an acronym for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. You may see it elsewhere as EDIA, which is Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, IDEA, which is same words, different order, or EDIB, which is Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging.
Identity conscious casting as opposed to colorblind or color conscious casting. Identity conscious casting, to quote casting director Victor Vasquez, is about making space and embracing how actors and artists can bring their whole identities or even parts of their identities to a process, to a character. We're not saying casting is blind to those parts, but we're also not saying it's only color that we're conscious about. We can also be conscious about somebody's rejection of gender as a construct, somebody's queerness, somebody's abilities, whether neurological or physical. That's what identity conscious means to Victor Vasquez, that we are inviting and welcoming, that we are actively and radically making space for all the different ways that actors exist in this world. And we're going to drop a link from Hal Round into the chat on this.
Harm. Harm is the suffering, loss, pain, and impact that can occur both in conflict and in instances of abuse, as well as misunderstandings steeped in differences of life experience, opinion, or needs.
Marginalized community. A marginalized community, sometimes referred to as an underrepresented, historically excluded, and/or frontline community, is a group of people who are denied equitable political, economic, cultural, or social access due to their identities. This marginalization could be based on race or ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, physical or mental disability, body size, age, language, economic status, immigration status, religion, systems impacted status, or a number of other factors.
Producer. Los Angeles has a unique theater ecosystem, one in which many of our theater producers are not producers in the typical sense of the word. LA has a strong history of artist-driven models and other alternative creation techniques. At the end of the day, somebody or a team of people selects the project that is ultimately responsible for the success and well-being of the project and the artists. Anywhere in this document we refer to a project's producers, that's who we mean.
And in addition to today's conversation.
PWI. PWI is an acronym for Predominantly White Institution.
SWANA. SWANA is an acronym for Southwest Asian North African, to be used in place of Middle Eastern, which has a colonial and Eurocentric origins.
MENA, Middle Eastern North African, sometimes preferred by producers from those regions.
Latine, a gender-neutral form of Latino or Latina.
Intention versus impact. Intent is what you aim to achieve through an action, and impact is how a person or community receives that action. However, the impact of that action does not always match the intent. Good intentions do not always result in a positive impact, and although our intention is not to hurt someone, our actions may lead to harm.
White supremacy, while often associated with extremism and hate groups, the term white supremacy also refers to a culture of beliefs, values, norms, and standards that perpetuate social, political, historical, and industrial white dominance, or white as the default. These insidious characteristics of white supremacy culture are often adopted by organizations as norms or standards without ever being actively named or chosen. These include perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, worship of the written word, paternalism, either-or thinking, and objectivity, to name a few. While this conversation largely addresses these harms, it is critical to acknowledge that instances of violence, harassment, threatening behavior, hypersexualization, fetishization, and use of racial slurs still exist within theatrical institutions.
And then we're going to go through a little bit deeper on these characteristics of white supremacy. And we're also going to drop this documentation into the chat. And then we'll continue the conversation from there. Do you want to head out, Socks, or do the next one?
Sure thing. The first, denial and defensiveness. The habit of denying and defending against the ways in which white supremacy and racism are produced and our individual or collective participation in that production.
Either or in the binary reduces the complexity of life and the nuance of our relationships with each other and all living things into either or, yes or no, right or wrong, in ways that reinforce urgency, one right way perfectionist thinking, and abuse of power.
Individualism, our cultural story that we make it on our own without help while pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps, is a toxic denial of our essential interdependence and the reality that we are all in this literally together.
One right way, along with perfectionism, paternalism, objectivity, and qualified. This means the belief there is one right way to do things, connected to the belief in an objective perfect that is both attainable and desirable for everyone, connected to the belief that I am qualified to know what the perfect right way is for myself and others.
Progress is more and quantity over quality. The assumption that the goal is always more and bigger, with an emphasis on what we can objectively measure as more valuable than the quality of our relationships to all living beings.
Worship of written word, honoring only what is written, and even then only what is written to a narrow standard, even when what is written is full of misinformation and lies. An erasure of the wide range of ways we communicate with each other and all living things.
Urgency. Applying the urgency of racial and social justice to our everyday lives in ways that perpetuate power imbalance and disregard for our need to breathe and pause and reflect.
Right to comfort and fear of conflict. The internalization that I or we have a right to comfort, which means we cannot tolerate conflict, particularly open conflict.
Fear. White supremacy's culture, right? White supremacy culture's number one strategy is to make us afraid. When we are afraid, we lose touch with our power and become more easily manipulated by the promise of an illusory safety.
Thank you all for sharing that. We're going to take 2 minutes as a group. Lois dropped into the chat the definitions as a whole. And if we wanted to just take 2 minutes to think about which of these characteristics resonates within you or people you know within your families, and which of these might be difficult for you to express or to understand. And feel free to share back in the chat, and we will as well. Thank you all for sharing in the chat. Please feel free to continue to share there. We're going to continue to hold space and read there, and I'm also going to start to move into our next section. I always love reading these definitions. It's like a reminder to myself as to what is at stake. And one thing I want to talk about here is personal stake. Although it sounds counterintuitive, developing your own personal stake and ending white supremacy is a great tool to become an anti-racist leader practitioner, an organizer, an artivist, if you will. So what is personal stake? Um, your personal stake is literally that. Why are you drawn to the concept of ending white supremacy? It is statistically proven to help connect folks to the movement long term when you have a personal stake in the ending of these systems and of the harm that they cause others. You are also, as a byproduct, liberated from your own harm. And when you start to think about these institutions and the connections between racism, homophobia, sexism, ableism, you start to really see these kind of roots crumble. Because if we um, are radical and we are there to liberate those who are most vulnerable of us, we also are liberated in that process. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my own personal stake in sharing this. And then we're going to take a minute to develop our own personal stakes together. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how that's going to go in a second. But because I was jumping ahead of myself, I'm going to take a deep breath and recenter myself for a second here while I pull up what I'm trying to talk about. Okay, so I am a white woman. I grew up in a very, very poor family. I grew up in a very uh, unstable family. I grew up as a family of divorce, and I also grew up in a family that had a history of abuse. My grandparents on my father's side were very tough people. And we have a history of mental illness as well as chronic illness in our family that has caused some major problems. And as I was growing up and I was seeing myself in this world, um, I I started to see the gaps. You know, you start to go to the doctor as a kid and you're not really listened to maybe about chronic pain that is starting up in your body. Um, the sense of urgency or the sense that there are always that we only fix things at the end is so prevalent in white supremacy culture. And as a chronically ill woman, ever since I was a kid in my journey in dealing with my chronic illness, every step of it, I can kind of now parse out and see some of the characteristics of white supremacy and how they disrupted my ability to get care and my family's ability to get care. Um, these systems have always been built to maintain the racist ideology, and that includes a lot of pushing things down, and that also includes perfectionism. And that really, really shows up when it comes to our disabled folks, including some of my family members and then myself as a chronically ill person. You're seen as less than. It is an imperfection. It is not that idealistic human body that people put on a pedestal. And as I started to learn about more about that, learn more about misogynoir, learn about the history of Black women and how they have been treated in hospitals, how many Black women die at the hands of doctors every year because they're not being listened to every step of the way. It started to really put it to my brain that this is not just a disabled problem. This is actually a problem of white supremacy as a whole. And as we come here together as storytellers, I think it's so important that we all learn that we all have probably multiple personal stake points into white supremacy. There are multiple things that we will all gain in dismantling these systems because we are all in some way touched by these systems, whether it's the underfunded art system that we all work under. Where is that money all going? The prison system, ICE, war. When we look at the majority of the Hollywood fringe community being women and non-binary folk, when we look at the disabled community that is very large within Fringe, the queer community that is really large within Fringe, we all have a stake in ending white supremacy, and we all have a reason to continue in this fight because once when we get free, everybody gets free is always the multiracial space uh, term that has been used that I've heard of, but it really does resonate as true for me right now, which is that we have never had more of a personal stake in ending white supremacy. If we do not organize our fellow white folks, we will lose this country to to be a country that we don't want to live in, and that I know that our community doesn't really stand for, based purely on the fact of seeing 40 Fringe shows last year. Um, but what I want to come back to is the idea that we can use our personal stake to fuel us when we are down. When you are feeling exhausted and when you're feeling overwhelmed, it's really hard to decide to join an organizing committee, commit to things within your practice. But if we don't commit to these small things within our practice and commit to these small organizing ways of disrupting the systems within our own jobs and hobbies that we are doing, then we are failing our communities. So in conclusion, my personal stake for me at this moment is that I look forward to a time when people are listened to in hospitals, when hospitals are places of safety, where people are going and being checked for things early in processes and people are listened to. When women come in with problems, they're listened to about their pain levels. There's research done into women's bodies. That would be beautiful. Where our trans community would have the healthcare needed to feel safe and to feel 100% themselves. And I know that my biggest reward would be that there would be no more intentional harm to communities through these systems that are supposed to keep us safe, like our hospital systems that so often are places of harm for people. And so for me, that's what I'm bringing into this year as that energy. But there's many other reasons to have a personal stake. And I'd love if people could take just 5 minutes to develop their own personal stake and create your own relationship to how you're going to dismantle white supremacy. So what comes up for you? Is it the systems that you have impacted you? Is it noticing things within your own communities? Is it something more personal for you? Is it connected to your family? Is it something that's connected to community members you might be close to? Um, how do we hold our personal stake with what's at stake for others? And that's why people, we get into some cultural messaging about being a savior, a hero, or a rescuer. And when have we maybe thought of ourselves in that role? And how can we remove ourselves in that role while also always trying to move the arc towards justice a little bit further each day? So we're going to take 5 minutes to reflect on that fact. And then in 5 minutes after that, there will be a little breakout room where we'll put folks in small groups. If you'd like to share at that moment, that's your time to share in groups. And people in our Zoom room will stay together. People who are on YouTube, I mean, the Zoom room, they'll go into little breakout rooms. And in the Zoom room, I'll stay with another little set of writing prompts that you can work on. And so 5 minutes to write about this. We'll break into the next groups. And yeah, thank you all. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for taking 5 minutes to ride upon this. I'm now going to open up some breakout rooms, and you'll go into those breakout rooms and just discuss what came up for you in writing that. Maybe if there's something that came up earlier in the characteristics of white supremacy that you have been meditating on, it'll just be an open space. I'm going to give everyone 7 minutes because we have a little bit extra time, 7 minutes, and I'll give you a countdown in the chat. See you all soon. And for our friends watching on YouTube, I'm just going to go to the next slide, which are some other questions that you can journal on today. Or you can fast forward 5 minutes, 7 minutes. I'm going to put on some royalty-free fun music. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I just wanted to, before we move into the next section, all about applying this all in the theater room, is that I wanted to, again, kind of go over what personal stake is, why we use it, and also these are some more questions that we invite you to journal upon this week, which are what are some ways that you and other white people are impacted as part of the system, and does the framework we just discussed change how you see your place within the system? So personal stake, it was a super foreign concept for me when I first was introduced to it. And I was first introduced to it through the organizing group White People for Black Lives, when was I was part of their organizing group. And actually, the reason that this panel came to be, and we're going back to that topic of why are we talking about this as white people, is that we began a lot of our conversations here at Hollywood Fringe, putting our BIPOC folks on panels about anti-racism and having them share back within our community to make things better. And often those conversations led to them being harmed, to them having to over-explain or to take up space that they didn't feel comfortable taking space in because it was a quite contentious topic at the time. And I think through that lens of us doing the work as a community, we have developed a community ethos around anti-racism. We have completely changed how we go through our spaces. It's really changed how Hollywood Fringe is kind of run. And part of that was the responsibility of the white folks within our community and taking up the anti-racism practice as a part of their responsibility to the Fringe community as well. And so when we were going through doing our anti-racism panels in 2021 and 2022, the topic was brought up of why don't white people do them? Why don't white people take on the burden of talking about anti-racism, get comfortable talking about anti-racism with each other, especially because we know through organizing groups that that's how people have built power. And funny enough, I was thinking about this and like meditating on it, and Emma Irene Olsen was in the front row of one of our first town halls of that season. And I was able to be like, oh, we were organized together at White People for Black Lives. I know that this is another white folk person that I can meditate on this concept with. So thank you, Emma. I know you're not on tonight because you have a different a conflict, but we love you. We really love the work that you've put into this, and thank you for helping change the Fringe community. Because since then, we've been able to have this model of talking about anti-racism, and it has been really impactful. And again, why we talk about personal stake is to be in it for the long haul. Unfortunately, anti-racism isn't something that's going to end like there's no end to being an anti-racist. Just like it just doesn't end. You have to be in constant practice. And so having your own personal stake in disrupting these spaces is so important for your own mental health. And it's also something that you don't bring out in every space. It's not something that we would be doing in a multiracial anti-racism panel in the same way and facilitating in the same way. And so if you would like to explore these topics more with other white folks, I would totally recommend Aware LA and White People for Black Lives. Aware LA is like the more Saturday dialogue and where you're having conversations around race, and White People for Black Lives being more of the actionable changing policy side of things. Both organizations work together and are amazing, and I highly uplift them for people who are looking to go deeper into their own practices. I don't know why I was sharing that the whole time that I said that, by the way. We are actually going in now into a panel. It is now into us bringing this back into the rehearsal room. And my first question to our panel is, after doing this personal stake journey, it's hard not to center ourselves in multiracial spaces. How do you approach anti-racism practices in question when you're not in fully white organizing spaces? How does it look a little bit different?
Um, I think, I mean, the thing I'll say is that just practicing in those spaces, not feeling like you have to have all the answers, I think that's really huge. Especially like because I'm a director and I'll speak from that experience. Sometimes just as a director, you feel like you have to have answers, and I think that's true of producers and, people who are sort of leading projects, but trying to keep yourself like conscious of you don't have to have the answers about things that aren't your experience. And in fact, it is powerful and wise to turn in those moments over and be sort of open to the idea that you are maybe wrong and and that you can be more curious than you have to be a fountain of knowledge.
I'm reminded of that billboard in LA with the two twin girls back to back that say, maybe the other person's right. Do you know what I'm talking about? No? Ellen's nodding her head. Okay, yeah.
I know what you're talking about. And yeah, kind of. Yeah. Do you want to explain it a little bit more for people who don't have that visual in their head?
It's just, well, it was just inspired by what Rosie said in terms of like turning to the expertise in the room and like listening and you know accepting that perhaps maybe your first instinct or first reaction is not correct or is not the right one, but it's this there's billboards, all these like pass it on billboards. Jamie Lynn Curtis is on one. They're all over LA. And there's one where it's these two like twin girls. They remind me of the sister Tia and Tamara girls in like their heyday, probably 8 years old, back to back, looking at each other kind of playfully. And it says, maybe the other person is right. Kindness, pass it on. So the city of LA supports and endorses and co-signs this panel with that billboard.
Yeah, totally. Socks, what comes up for you?
I'm thinking about I do, as a producer and an event organizer, I'm often working in contexts where I'm trying to get a bunch of people in the room. And something I'm thinking about is like, how do I make sure the balance is good here? And that, like the problem can be sometimes if it's just our friends or it's just the people we know. I think it's an ongoing issue I have as a producer is just like branching out to increasingly diversify my network to have enough people to tap. That's just a lifetime's work to make sure that I am making the effort to meet people of different lived experiences. But then when it actually comes to like inviting them to be in the room, I'm thinking about how that can't just be a numbers game. Like that can't just be about, oh, did I do a 50-50 with who I actually solicited? Because if I'm not thinking about these things from the cultural context that they exist within, if I'm not thinking about it from a perspective of artist care and cultural consciousness and cultural humility, that might lead to a tokenizing experience. So that's like a really critical aspect of wanting to do works with a diverse community is you have to be prepared to meet that person from their lived experience, and like you might make mistakes and need to be humble about it and not take it personally and things like that. And it's not uncommon for me to get some pushback from people in the community who will be like, why isn't this more diverse than it is? That happens to me a lot. I think that there may be other people that it's pretty common. I feel like when you are, especially when you're like new to producing work or casting, and people are like, why is this an all white cast? Or like, why aren't there enough people from this voice in the room? And that's a real it's difficult to navigate because that is real, and that there is a need to continually push these representative barriers. We always want to be doing better than we're doing. And how do you make sure that you don't come from a place of feeling personally attacked by that, understanding that like that question isn't necessarily about you having a moral failing. You still have to put in the effort. You still have to try. But you're not morally failing for not having immediately gotten it right out the gate, and making sure you're navigating that like yes, that's a real concern, and that's a real question and worth acknowledging, and also like it's not about me protecting my pride right now.
Yeah, Rosie, I saw that you had your something to say. Oh no. I wanted to transition this because this is a perfect segue into conscious casting and about bringing anti-racism into your casting practices, because it's 100% right to that Hollywood fringe productions are going to vary and their diversity, and also Hollywood fringe productions have a really unique lens of most of them being friends putting on things together. And one thing that was brought up in one of these sessions a long time ago, somebody was like, wow, I just need more diverse friends. And the truth is, yeah, maybe you do, you know? One thing that is a big part of opening up these and widening these nets is making sure that you are in this beginning of your production process is being extremely wide with your nets. And if it is a paid opportunity, being extremely conscious of how you're spreading the joy when that door gets opened for you, because that's where we see the clog. We don't see the clog in these small indie productions of friends that are having issues. We see problems when that indie production gets to a new level and they're not leveling up their ability with casting, even though now they have the cash to flow to do so. You know, and so I'd love to talk. My question here is, how can you bring anti-racism into your casting practice? And then how do you go about casting in a way that brings a harmonious understanding of like your ethos? Is there anything that you do within that casting process to bring anti-racism into every aspect of your theatrical project?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, okay, I have a couple thoughts on this specific to Fringe. I mean, I think first of all, I think that when you rush, um, in general, you tend to default to what you know, and that can often lead to this thing of, who are my friends, and maybe my friends are not the most diverse community. So as much as possible, right? Like we're having this conversation in March. Like I would urge people just to like talk about something actionable. I would urge people to plan ahead enough that you're not just reaching out to your tight network. And I'm saying this as somebody who often works with a lot of the same people. So I am not absolving myself of this. But I think that can be a really huge part of it. I would also challenge that I think that Fringe, this is just like me getting on my soapbox for a second, but like I think Fringe is an opportunity to make amazing theater. I mean it's an opportunity to work out the new thing you're doing, but I think you ought to think of it as I mean, this is like reductive, but like you ought to think of it as real. Like you ought to think of it as a real thing you're doing, and therefore, think about budgeting. Like everything is tied together, right? So it's like if you're wanting to bring a more diverse group of people in, people who aren't just your buddies who are going to do it for free or very cheap, coming at it from an early on point of like, can I get a little bit of a budget together, even if it's not, we don't have to talk about Broadway money, but I think can I get a budget together to honor people for their time, and am I there for bringing in people who are not just the same, usual suspects who maybe know me and are going to do me a favor. I think those are two sort of actionable things for people who are in March thinking about their shows in June.
I would love to hop on this thought because, yeah, I think it's very real that artists on the margins from many identities, but especially people of the global majority, really struggle to be able to do that work for free, work for exposure sort of thing, because when you are marginalized, you are systemically disadvantaged and you cannot afford to do things like these unpaid internship sort of situations, doing things for the credit, for the experience. And I definitely see it kind of commonly from a producer, casting director sort of side of like, I said I wanted diverse people. Why didn't they come? I said I wanted them, but they didn't come, so it's not my fault. And I think that it is important to remember that what you are offering to the artist is just as important as who these artists are that you're trying to bring. Like, what is the space that you have? In particular, I think it's just a real thing that marginalized artists, like people of color, will feel safer when they see that there are other people from their community already involved. And like one of the best ways to make sure people of color are going to show up is like making sure your leadership includes people from these communities. And I think that's just important in general from like fighting these systemic disadvantages is giving people opportunities where you're able, where you have capacity to create an opportunity for someone, recognizing that like not everyone has had the ability to learn all of the skills in traditional ways through like conservatory training or what have you because of these disadvantages. And so like something you may be able to do to increase access is to say, okay, I can like mentor this person into this role and upskill them so that there are more people. One of the projects that I work on outside of Fringe is I have a trans vocal collective of professional level musicians that are all gender expansive. And like one of the things that we have run into when trying to find people from this marginalized community is there are a lot of folks who are talented but cannot read sheet music. And so our first thought was like, okay, the talent is out there. We just have to attack this skill barrier that exists. So now one of our main missions that we want to do when we have the ability for more auxiliary programming is teach people how to read sheet music for like free or pay what you can, so that it's easier for us to have upskilled artists that can meet us in the room. So that's like the type of mentorship that might look like. It's like, what can I offer that I already have in my toolkit that will allow this person to access this space? And then like you can form these meaningful long-term partnerships with collaborators from diverse experiences.
Can I also just say really, really quickly, I talked about casting, Socks talked a little bit about like, like leadership. I think something else that gets neglected a lot in Fringe is design. And that's like, first of all, you should just be hiring designers because you should be hiring designers. But second of all, like hiring diverse designers is also like a really important and essential way that you get different perspectives into the like actual creation and implementation of the thing you're making. So I just want to shout that out too. It's March. There's so many really great designers of all different backgrounds who are working in the city who would be very excited to get thrown into your project if you have, the funds and the ask and the meaningful way of approaching them.
Totally, totally. I wanted to ask about how we set the tones and rehearsal spaces to be anti-racist, even if the productions have little to do with social or political change.
One thing that I do, less directly anti-racist, but more broadly from an access perspective, is every time that I am selecting singers for a gig with this ensemble I work with, we ask the question, what access needs do you have to be successful in this space? Like, what do you need to have a successful participation in this project? And I think just in general, that mindset of like, what do you need? What can we provide you that will give you the ability to have success in this space?
I think for us at Hollywood Fringe too, I just want to bring up that having our community ethos was such a great way for us to provide a resource for people to set the tone. And I think that that's like a really important thing that you can do is just sharing with your team members the community ethos, even developing your own if you would like to, on top of Fringe's very basic one. It was such a great way for us to communicate not only what's not allowable, which I know a lot of people will do, like contracts or community agreements or these things within their rehearsal rooms, but also not only saying what's not allowed, but what is encouraged and what we're envisioning together as a safe space was just a really beautiful practice for our community.
Hmm.
I'll add in just being conscious of your blind spots, I think. Like, again, it's very easy, or not easy, I shouldn't say it that way. I think that for a long time, people have neglected, like from a lighting perspective, how lights look on Black bodies, right? From a costume, hair, makeup perspective, right? I know a lot of people, I mean, a lot of Black artists who've been asked to do their own makeup or their own hair because, somebody said, I just don't think I would be able to, and you probably know, which again, that makes that person feel like they weren't considered in the overall idea of what this show looks like. So I think examining your blind spots and really sort of, again, it comes down to preparation and care. It's hard to have solid care when you don't prepare, right? Like when you're flying off the seat of your pants, you hire someone at the last minute, they might you might not have had time to have the conversation about like, are you actually prepared to do everybody's hair in this show? Yeah, I mean, I think that is a big piece of the puzzle also.
Totally. I really do like that we've brought up so many things already, including lighting, and I think that that was something that was a big point of topic last year was about how the lighting is so important. And when you're in a fringe space, you're operating with like a totally different system. So being really conscious of working and talking about like doing your research before you go into a space is so important. And also, so many of our venues now, have their own sets where they're like, okay, this is how this looks good. And so also trusting both the actor, the tech, and the people to kind of all come together to make sure that there's a fully cohesive piece together. And then additionally, when it comes to booking things for people like hair and makeup, if you book for one, you got to book for all. And that I think that's the rule, period. So if you're going to be hiring hair and makeup artists, they better have a cultural competency or hire multiple within your production.
Hmm.
I did somebody have
Could I
something?
throw one last
Yeah, do it.
thought on this? I'm also thinking about anti-punitive, anti-carceral mentality. And so what I mean by that is like really taking into account our humanity when mistakes come up and like not operating from a place of three strikes you're out, from this idea like something I struggle with frequently in this ensemble I work with is like absences. Things come up, people commit to days and then they have an emergency. Their car breaks down. They get sick. They have to take on work that pays them more because they're having a financial crisis. These things happen and it's so important that like we don't approach these moments punitively from this idea of like there will be these negative consequences if you continue to accumulate mistakes or things like that. This idea like we are human. Human things happen to us and plans change. That's such a big struggle in production is like you plan all of these things logistically and things do go wrong. And again, the ego of it all, like making sure that when those things go wrong, that you're balancing like I don't have a moral failing, and also this isn't about my pride.
100%. This is actually perfect into the next question, which is about tools and practices to reduce harm and navigate conflict when it arises within your rehearsal room. Is there anything to speak to in that arena? Socks, I'm getting lots of nods. I gotta ask you first.
This is something I do a lot. I have a lot of conversations about this, both in the world of theater and in the other mediums that I'm in around. In particular, this has been coming up in choir spaces for me recently because I'm involved in a number of vocal ensembles. And so the rehearsal room is really a big place where conflict can occur. And yeah, that's been a big topic about like how do we as leadership make sure that there are safe channels to express whatever's going on. So it's like if I'm the leader in the space, I either want to make sure that like I'm conducting myself in a way that means I am trustworthy and safe to come to, and or that there is someone else someone can go to. Because if I'm the problem, because it happens, even if I have the best of intentions, I can make a mistake and someone might not feel super comfortable going directly to me about the mistake I made. And even though I want to be called in, the easiest way for us to get there might be for them to have like a deputy. Sometimes we use that term, but there may be better, like more anti-carceral language for like, a person that you choose from the community, self-nominate or community nominated, who can be that point of contact between leadership and the rest of the company, so that there's always a safe way to let someone know when something's going on. And then making sure that there's really going to be accountability from there, because it is all too common where it's like, okay, we got your report and, we'll talk about it. And sometimes like nothing comes from that. It feels like time goes by endlessly. Really communicating is so important. And sometimes when these situations are complicated and require time, it's like really important that you are communicating those expectations and not leaving someone sitting in their discomfort without answers. Like that's really just so important to trust maintenance. You're making sure that you are someone who is communicating what's going on consistently, even if it is just like, hey, this is a complicated issue and we do need time to resolve it, but we're committed to that. And here's like what you can immediately expect next. Here is a plan. Here is a path forward. We will not leave this out to rot. Um, and accountability is especially difficult to talk about when it comes to removing someone from a space. This is a really, really big topic. Is like, when have you reached the point where resolution is truly not possible? Because I think all too often I either see places that just go like, we don't have a responsibility to resolve this, and
Yeah.
like it's up to you to decide if you just don't want to be here anymore. Or yeah, or it's like then it feels like they have to choose which person to kick out. And so I'm very much for, personally, I'm really for restorative justice, this idea that we really have to give people the opportunity to learn, to call them
Yeah.
in, to ask them to do better. And sometimes we may need to take breaks and say, hey, we're going to ask you to step away for a few weeks. Here's the expectation of what change we're looking for in that time. And here is the route back into the community. But we don't want to create this common system where harm that may be unintentional or may be resolvable through education and a buy and repair process. We don't want to allow these first off instances of harm to result in immediate rejection, because that's how we lose allies from spaces. Is sometimes people make mistakes because they truly didn't know better. And there's no other way to get them to this side of the fence than to give them the chance to try again.
And just to let the Fringe community know, when you're navigating this in Fringe spaces, you're not alone. The Fringe staff does work on our conduct cases with you, and so if you have a conflict, immediately reach out to us, because we are such a good sounding board. We don't have to get physically involved in order to, or like the person doesn't even need to know on your team, but we're good sounding boards. And then additionally, we have conflict resolution management for when things escalate to a point where we have to step in. And so please reach out to us. And I saw Olivia unmuted, and so I want to give you a chance to speak.
Yeah, I just really loved everything that Sock said, and I wanted to kind of support that. And also, I've been in a situation in a space where I had to face a decision. Like there was someone who uh, it wasn't working. It wasn't working, and I only had the tools that I had at the time in 2022 to like deal with this conflict. And if I could do things differently now, I absolutely would. But I wanted to harken back to one of our little slide bits about being the savior. I think that that's like part of the white supremacy culture. And also, I mean, I'm sure a lot of folks on this call can relate with like being in a place of like, oh, I'm responsible for this. This is my thing to fix, right? On like a super macro level or super micro level and also macro because that's part of white culture, but it could also be the houses we were raised in, the order that we were born, if you're like the oldest daughter or etc. There's lots of reasons why one might feel responsible for saving situation and saving a person from a situation. And I think it's very thank you, Ellen, for calling out that you're not doing it alone, right? We are free of the hyper individualism, at least a little bit in this space, which I think is really valuable. And we've said some version of this in all these panel responses, but space, creating space for yourself for the situation, not this urgency to fix it, solve it right now so we can keep the train on the tracks goes really far, and I think goes far in everything, and also grace for yourself and whatever conflict you might be in, because we're just humans walking around trying to make it through.
Remembering that it's just a stupid theater play is so helpful because people like put it like on this pedestal and I'm like, it's a stupid theater play. You're like at the end of the day, and even when it's the most important political work at the end of the day, it's a theater play.
I have a little sign on my
Yeah,
desk that says, ultimately, it's not that serious. Take a breath. And
totally.
it's a good daily mantra.
And because you can't change the world when you're not changing yourself.
Yeah.
I have
Really.
two really like short, like just like again, like little practical things that I think. First of all, I don't like to promise people safe spaces. I promise them brave spaces. And the difference between those two things for me and how I define that is a safe space is like no matter what, you will be taken care of in this room. And I don't like to promise that to people because I don't have the ability to make that happen. Because I can't control what people say. And I can't control what people come in with. And I think that that comes from a really people do that because they wish for that to be the case, but you really can't make that happen. Whereas promising a brave space essentially means that you are empowering people to walk away when they feel that something has been harmful, speak their truth if they feel like they need to. And I think I find that that is sort of like it's a good overarching sort of way to establish your room at the beginning of a process, because you're sort of codifying how empowered people are to care for themselves versus you being like, don't worry, I won't let anything bad happen to you, which again, you really can't promise.
100%. It's transparency is so important on what you are and aren't able to do financially, emotionally, time-wise. If it's like sometimes it's as simple as having like an auto response of like, I'm gonna get to you. I need this much time, but like so that you can center yourself to even be the best in that moment. I've had that conversation, or thankfully I have a co-director that I can toss it to, and we toss it back and forth quite often during the festival season based on who has the brain cell at the time. Because we share one, by the way. We share one brain cell between the two of us. And you just don't know who has one that day. But I think it's so important to maybe like also tap those people within your team so it's not all on one person, like you said in that beginning, Socks, having the captain or deputy or person who's going to manage that, as well as your head producer, as well as the maybe you have an intimacy coordinator, maybe you have these like other places that are having touchstones within the production that can be a part of these conversations as well. It'll be so dependent on your production who needs to be a part of the like solidification of your process. I love representative.
Ooh, thank you for the suggestion of representative in place of deputy in the chat. That's a great synonym substitute. Um, I totally had a thought I wanted to share.
I believe in it coming back.
Bring us back into the conversation we were having while I let it cook.
Totally. It's just back into that like preventing harm in that space, but also addressing it. And then I wanted to talk about like accountability, just to bring it back into that fringe perspective. When it comes to safety, there's and illegal things that are happening. There is a different line, and by illegal I mean when it comes to physical assault or these other lines that are just very, very clear. Um, but additionally, we often come into rooms that are not not escalated to that level. There are that it is based on personal conflict, and that's developed into a bigger problem, or also sometimes accidentally racially motivated moments, sexually motivated moments that were not meant to be. These things happen. And I think one of the biggest things that we've seen in our many years of going into these rooms is that the rooms that resolve are the rooms that take a breath and realize that they might be the problem sometimes. As soon as you realize you're a part of a whirlwind just by working with the whirlwind and not calling it out in the first moment and being like, I wanted to associate with this whirlwind. You decided to associate with that whirlwind. And even sometimes that's the acknowledgement you have to give to yourself. And I have had a very imperfect journey, addressing so much of these rooms. And now I feel very confident going into conflict now, navigation, because I've made so many mistakes in my, many years of living. And so I think that it's while you are going on these journeys, it's about being open to the fact that anybody at any time can be making a mistake. And if you are thinking through every situation that critically, the harm will be minimized because you're taking such care for every person involved, even in a situation where it might be very high stress.
Also, to add on to this subject, getting just comfortable with the idea that you will make mistakes and like just taking accountability as a practice. Like it really does get easier the more you practice doing it. So the sooner you can shed that ego and just be like, yeah, whoops, I made a mistake. Wow, that had an impact. I'm sorry. And just being able to move through that really fluidly and being comfortable with, wow, yeah, I just made a mistake. I'm going to immediately do the work that needs doing to fix it because that's like, I don't know, that's how I personally get as the sense of internal peace is knowing I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing about it, which is what will make things okay. I got my thought back from earlier, which is that I wanted to talk a little bit about collectivity and this idea that like a truly flat hierarchy is very difficult to achieve, but I think that what really does work well is honoring that everyone in a collective has different strengths, and that it's not necessary for like one or a very small cohort of people to have this concentrated level of responsibility and control at the top because it can be it's been so much better to shift, especially in this vocal collective space where I work, is previously I was a co-founder. I was doing a lot of the stuff with like the social media and the communications and event planning and all of these things. And it's a lot. And part of like releasing individualist culture is getting comfortable with the idea that like I don't have to be the person to do all of those things. And actually, it's so much better if like everyone is given a little bit of responsibility that I can count on them for, and that like I think especially in an era, I don't say post COVID because there is no post, but you know we are in a pandemic onset era. We are living in a world where many people's abilities and health have changed radically in the past few years, and people get sick a lot more often now. People's batteries are smaller. They're more likely to have emergencies. I've felt the shift in the landscape with this really concretely. And I think that another way we can both like take care of our mental well-beings, but also like look at systems more for longevity and sustainability than this like impossible standard of like, well, we just have to make as much as possible as fast as possible forever. Um, but really looking about it like, okay, and if I need to step away, you know, who are the like three people who I can have take little bits of things off my plate? Who is going to help me shoulder the load when I need to take a break? Because that's also part of like countering white supremacist culture. We are all human. We are meant to take breaks. We are meant to need support from one another. So how do we like shift the way we look at the way we run our teams?
Can I also say that again, an actionable version of that which I think, I mean, that is also very actionable, but I think something that I'm just like, again, I'm trying to like, what is the fringe version of that? And to me, that is like, okay, plan, right? So like we keep talking about things could go wrong. Don't let yourself get surprised about something going wrong. Like think through the idea of like, well, what happens if my lead actress is sick, right? Or has a family emergency or has some sort of extenuating circumstance that means that she's not going to perform, right? Like allow yourself to not be bamboozled by that and then therefore sort of like put that harm on somebody else and instead be like, do I have an understudy? Is it me? Like, am I willing to cancel the show? Am I willing to have somebody go on with a script in hand? Like, and I think you can sort of think through some scenarios that will help you be more able to weather the storm of people's humanity, right? Like this person's a human, they couldn't show up, so what am I going to do when that happens?
Contingency, contingency, contingency. So important to keep your mental health game, like up for the game. And the truth is that I don't have this written down, but I do want to ask, like, how do you keep yourself in a centered place where you can take on the stress of Fringe, but also navigate these personal issues that are happening within your teams, and also, if a conflict does arise, not explode, you know? What are these like calming practices that people can do within their minds to be the best versions of themselves for their teams?
I'm just gonna jump in and say I've never done it perfectly. I'm always stressed. Like I just want to be honest about that. Like I feel like I'd be a liar if I was like, here's my three-step process. I can tell you that the things that have gotten easier for me, again, like I feel like a broken record, but like the more I plan, the less spun out I get, right? So I think in my early days of Fringe, and this is okay, I was 21. But my first Fringe in 2015, we can all do the math on that. But that was like everything was kind of flying by the seat of my pants. So then I was discovering, things that made me anxious. So some of it comes with time and experience. So I think like if it's your first Fringe, if it's your first time directing a show or producing a show or whatever it is, writing it, like I think give yourself some grace because you're gonna make mistakes and you are gonna get stressed out is like my real truth. But I think the more you can sit down and plan, the more you can reach out to people who have done the things you're trying to do before. Like ask somebody what like their most stressful Fringe experience was. And then that might point to the thing that you might be able to navigate better than they did their first time. Yeah, and I mean like on a personal level, like I don't manage my stress well, so I'd be a liar. I cannot tell you, do not do what I do. Um, we're on a journey. I don't know. I drink a lot of water. That's my answer, but like do more than that. I don't know.
I
Uh,
first of
oh,
all,
Olivia, go.
oh sorry, I didn't see you
Go,
unmuted.
go, go, Olivia.
Tell me your most stressful Fringe experience is a great icebreaker question at the at the meetups. Um,
Mhm.
and also just to Rosie's point, like I also have never successfully not been stressed out at a Fringe festival, and I think sometimes it can be okay to accept I'm gonna get stressed out. I'm gonna get stressed out and I'm gonna let myself feel stressed out or like sad or angry if something happens or really excited and nervous. And like it can be really powerful to name what you're feeling and let yourself feel it instead of being like, I'm so stressed out and that's gonna be bad. That's gonna make things bad and worse and I'm gonna ruin it. And like that's like that, that pressure that we can really put on ourselves to be perfect. When in reality, if you can show up and think, you know what, I'm going to be stressed for the month of June. And and then after that, I'm probably going to be sad because the month of June is over. And you can just be in that moment and let yourself feel the stress, feel the sad, and then move past it. That way it's not this like, thing that's lingering and this albatross that you want to avoid for the next year.
Mm. Hmm. What I wanted to add is I really care about how stressed my team is. That's something that I feel like I hold a lot of responsibility for when I'm in a leadership position, like a producer. And as much as possible, I really try to prevent any trickle down stress. What can I do to prevent as much of this from reaching my collaborators in the first place? So one is over communicate. Like truly say everything so explicitly. Don't make assumptions about what people already know about how Fringe works, about when they're supposed to be where. Put it all out really explicitly, color code it, and send it at least 3 times. And ask them, is email the best way to reach you? Will you be reading this email? Do I need to text you when I send you an email? The more energy you're able to invest in really building a communication system that you know will be effective for everyone involved, the more miscommunications you avoid. And then that's preventing stress, because I find that a lot of my stressors from productions, besides the inevitable someone's sick, someone's car broke down sort of thing, is a miscommunication. Someone didn't know rehearsal was tonight, and I just asked them what their ETA was, and they're leaving now because they forgot. Things like that. So thinking about like this is also good from like a disability accessibility standpoint and neurodivergent accessibility. Just like over communicate, really don't make assumptions, and as has been said, plan as far ahead as you possibly can. The more time you give yourself so that you're not stuck in that urgent crunch will never feel good. It will always be so bad. And it's really good to give yourself all of the spare room for those emergencies, to just kind of expect that something will go wrong. And I built in at least 2 weeks for that to happen, or whatever that looks like in your case.
I have 2 questions left, and I wanted to name right now that I'm about to ask one more. But if anybody in the chat on the YouTube or in here wants to put it in the chat, a question in the chat, we will answer it after this question that I'm about to ask. Or if you want to wait, you can unmute and ask your question live if that is preferable to you. The question that I have here is, how do you go about challenging folks on their thought processes when they don't align with your goals, without derailing the whole process, but especially with those in power over you? How do you have conversations when you are not the empowered person?
I always start with questions, no matter what, no matter who I'm talking to, either direction. Because I think something we talked about earlier is this thing of like wanting to keep people invested, not wanting to turn people away, right? And I think asking somebody a question will often help them find the thing that is misaligned on their own. And I also think that, you know, if I'm coming from a place of assuming that I'm not the best or the greatest or the most correct or the most knowledgeable about any of this, sometimes maybe I'm wrong, right? So asking a question is the best way for me to get more insight into where they're coming from, and also to help them sort of see what I am getting at. Yeah, I think that's my answer. Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. Asking questions is good, and generally having a curious mentality. Like, I was wondering, I noticed, things like that for your framework. Also, where and how are you having the conversation? Where is it going to be most productive? During rehearsal might not be the right time, and sometimes that's difficult when someone might be like raising a question, and you're like, this is not the space for us to unpack that. It's important to both say, like, this is worth unpacking, and this conversation needs to be had and will be had, and also like we have to keep rehearsing for all of the reasons, both it's like what's logistically necessary and also what's best emotionally for everyone that's in the space at that time. Where is a message over written communication like email or text going to work versus where does this need to be face to face or voice to voice? What is the environment in which we're having this conversation, and making sure that when there are disagreements or tension, how do we avoid accusatory frameworks, and how do we come from a place that allows for the best intentions to be revealed, to not assume malignant intent. Really shedding that ego as much as possible when it comes to being in spaces with someone who has power over you, because I've talked a lot about what to do when you're in charge, but when you're not in charge, it's a difficult call, because sometimes there are spaces where if you invest your energy or if you align with other comrades who are in your cohort on a peer level, sometimes you can make actionable change. And if you are able to do that, it oftentimes can be very worth doing. It's also good to know when that change isn't possible, when the institution is not going to be reformed from within. When is it time to leave a space and create your own space that can honor the values? When is it time to split with a space because it does not honor the values that you are aligned with? So these are conversations I try to make sure that I bring up what needs bringing up. I'm currently in a mediation process with an artistic director for an organization that I'm a part of because I'm very concerned about a lot of things. And I've said everything, I've put it in documentation. I'm going to show up and we'll see. And ultimately, like the right move might be like this space and I do not align in our values and the way we conduct ourselves. And it's going to be better for me. I'm going to have more of an impact in the way I want to have an impact if I do this work elsewhere.
Olivia, do you have anything to add when it comes to the question was challenging folks on their thought process when they don't align with your goals, especially with those in power over you?
Yeah, it is very challenging if someone has power over you, because then, at least speaking from my experience, sometimes I feel like I have to perform something and, no one be mad at me, please. But asking questions, curiosity has been said, very, very powerful. And also finding a place for yourself and for them where you were already in agreement. There's probably something that you already agree upon, are aligned on, and starting from there as the foundation where you're originating a conversation that might turn tense and might have conflict. And maybe you work backwards from that. You can always return to that place where you agree, just having that, the ability that not only serves both of you, and it also serves you to bring yourself up like to this level of their power and then bring them on the same plane as you. So if you can control that dynamic and make everything more even and work against the power dynamic, I think more productive conversations can occur.
Do we have any questions in the chat or in the room? Otherwise, I have two questions actually left. Okay, I have two questions and they're kind of related. The first one is, how do you advocate for others when you're on like that same linear level? You're not in leadership, but there's a conflict that's happening regarding somebody else's experience. How can you be a good ally in those moments, especially when it comes to our Black and Brown community members? How can we be good allies in the room when we're not in power?
I think a big one is I heard that too, right?
Mhm.
Like I feel like when somebody is saying that they felt something or they experienced something a certain way, or even just like that literally
Yeah.
happened, saying I heard that too is huge. Um, I think I mean I think from like the perspective of like, right, like we all have these different intersectional identities, right? And like I think you know, I can sometimes experience fatigue trying to advocate from like a perspective of like gender, right? Or like sometimes I experience fatigue as a Jewish person, right? Like I those are like things that I can sort of tap out from because I'm like this personally affects me and I'm tired, right? But if you are to be a true ally to people who do not share the same identities with you, like those are moments to tap in, right? Like so I as like a white Jewish woman don't get to be fatigued by Islamophobia. Like that's my actual like that's my thing to take up. So I think thinking about how you can sort of have the energy that maybe your peer doesn't have because it's personally affecting them, that feels really huge. And also, this feels kind of reductive to say, but I think that there's just like when you feel a little thing in your stomach and you feel like it should be said, I think this goes back to fear, which we talked about earlier today, right? That it's like, what if everybody hates this point? What if it's misconstrued? What if blah blah blah? What if it loses me this job? And that's real. Like, and we all have to negotiate that, especially if you have an intersectional identity, or maybe you are also afraid for your job. Like, I understand that. But, but I do think that like the I talk a lot about this, and I think it's really huge, the bravery of speaking first. Um, it's really, really comfortable to speak second. Um,
Yeah,
because once one person has said it, then you get to say, yes, I agree, or you get to be like, oh my God, I thought that same thing, right? And we're all always so grateful to the person who spoke first. So I think that when you're advocating for another person who, I mean, in that scenario, really, they spoke first, but being the first one to be like, give yourself the push to be brave and say the thing when maybe you're dying inside for somebody else to do that first.
totally.
That was very much what came to mind. I was definitely thinking similar things about when you are the person who usually has to advocate for something. Sometimes you are exhausted, and it is very meaningful to see an ally to speak up, to acknowledge that something happened, and maybe not necessarily take charge, because you should make sure that you're not acting without being informed with the cultural context, which maybe the person who is more directly affected is only going to be the person who has. But being like, I'm kind of interested in like sending an email to the director about this. What do you think? Is that a good move? Is Would you like me to do that? It's offering direct actions, I think, is always, and this is good life advice in general, is like when you want to help someone, being like, what do you need? And if they feel like maybe they aren't prepared with a suggestion, throw a few things out of like things that you'd be willing to do. Because it doesn't have to just stop at, I heard that. It can also be like, I'd like to say something about this. I'd like to get a leadership figure involved. I'd like to call attention to it. Is that something that you think you'd like me to do in collaboration with you? Or I could even do this for you so you don't have to be involved if that's your preference. What do you think? Making sure that agency is a big part of the conversation as well.
Yeah.
Um, the ability to look at a room and assess who is holding the most power and who potentially is the most vulnerable is also maybe just a great awareness to go into spaces. There's a little asterisk I want to put on that because there can be so many assumptions made in that like assessment. So
Yeah.
that's something that you want to approach with like really intentional, like I don't even know what the words are, but like things that are facts and not just assumptions, things that you know to be true, not just things that you are assuming are true. And that could take time, right? But if you find that you're someone in a space who possibly has more power than someone else, um, I really liked Rosie's phrase of brave spaces. Um, like if you can, you know, I saw something recently that's reminded me of bravery, which is that if you are someone who benefits from the structure of white supremacy and you really want to dismantle it, you have to be willing to be like the most vulnerable person in the room. You have to be willing to be treated and dismissed and treated like as poorly as the you have to be willing to go to accept that for yourself. Not accept it, but know that that might be you might disempower the thing that's been boosting you up your whole life without you realizing it. And there's a lot of bravery inherent in that. Um, that's a huge ask right off the bat. That's obviously something that, um, we're not talking about a really specific scenario, but like really broadly and in terms of what mindset cap you're coming into your collaborative spaces in, that can be helpful.
Can I say one thing about power really quickly? Just because as we're talking about fringe, we've talked a lot about rehearsal spaces, and I just want to layer in that there's all sorts of power structures that exist within like the festival at large. And like,
Yeah.
I think something to think about as white artists in the Fringe Festival, in addition to how you're showing up in your process, is how you're showing up at like the plunge, which
Yeah.
is if for anyone who's if this is your first Fringe, that's a bar that a lot of people go to. That's at the Broadwater. That's just one example. But like, how are you showing up at Fringe Central? How are you showing up in like those like Facebook forums, right? Like I think thinking about because this is a panel about Fringe and Fringe is not just the art you make independently. I think you also there's something to think about um power in so many ways. And you know, like I this is just like one example, but like I remember my first Fringe being 21 and feeling like a really immense power dynamic from like 50-year-old men who like to Olivia's point about perceived power, like later on, I am now in my 30s, and I have discovered that many of those people have no fucking power at all. But that's
Yep.
what it felt like to be a 21-year-old woman in the Fringe Festival and feel like, so how you wield your power and how you show up in spaces that are casual or extracurricular or even like moment like things like this. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so, so right. And like, it's so right that so many people who have perceived power also have none. And that's why they cling so desperately to what power they do have, is because the truth is that it is an antiquated way of being. The world is changing. I know Rosie and I have seen Fringe change like crazy. It was very different. And I will say that, there's been a lot of change, but what I haven't seen a full change in is that like people have perceived power, especially when it comes to press and when it comes to awards and when it comes to these things. And again, rely on the Fringe staff. We're here to navigate any conflicts that arise, but also remember that the majority of our organizations we work with are incredibly grassroots, and that this is everything seems so much more grand than it really is. And when you remember that, it also helps you level the playing field where you can feel comfortable calling these things out, calling things in, calling people in, calling things out, being a part of the culture that we're trying to build here, which is a place for artists where artists feel like they're building their own festival together, which is kind of how Fringe is. Like everybody is building it together piece by piece, and things are very easy to change here because we change it every year. And so if we avoid conflict and we avoid these conversations, that's where we really get into trouble, and that's where we really don't get to make change. So thank you for bringing that up. And remember that we're here for you, but also sometimes it's just easy to remember, oh, like there's no paid press in LA. Like some of these are just blogs. I don't have to be on that blog. I could go to another blog. You could become your own press person. There's so many things. To be registered press, to be fair, you have to have a publication for more than a year. We have rules about our registered press. That doesn't mean you can't start your year out by being non-registered press and doing like that. Many show blogs have started that way, as being non-registered press doing things in LA theater, and then all of a sudden they write a review that all of us go, well, shit, they got that right, and somehow they become part of the larger conversations. So I think it's an empowering thing as well as a kind of an harder thing. Do any of our panelists have any last like remaining thoughts that they want to say? Olivia, I see you leaning towards the. Nope, no, you do not. Um, Nobody else? Okay. Lastly,
Uh,
how do we
Oh, I was just gonna hop in
go
here to
socks?
say, cultural humility is just a term that I'm holding near and dear right now. And, I think that one kindness we can do to ourselves and also for others is it's okay to not know.
Yeah,
It's actually okay to just be one human amongst billions of unique lived experiences and to be really comfortable with the idea that you will be learning all of the time and it's okay to have not known and then to enter into knowing and to navigate that.
thank you, socks. That's
The end.
lovely. Um, my last thing is just if there's anything that we wanted to address about like how we approach these conversations in multiracial spaces, and is there anything that you would add as a layer that we haven't said yet? Because this was done in a more protective space where we can kind of talk and draft and bring up trauma in a way without triggering one another.
Mm. I really valued the opportunity to discuss our journals in the breakout space, and I think it was just really nice to recognize some common lived experiences and like that. Yeah, we don't always get to have direct conversations about what it's like to be an aspiring ally, to be someone who is on their learning journey, to support another community, and to recognize that like we come from places where ignorance was not something we chose. It's something that we have had to crawl our way out of with our own hands. So that was honestly really lovely and affirming to get to have a conversation where I saw those parallels in someone and saw us both on the journey showing up today to do the work.
Thank you. Any last closing thoughts, Olivia?
I have found in all things, it is very helpful to assume best intentions. It just helps because usually, and I think especially in fringe spaces, but in all spaces, assuming that the person who just said something that hurt your feelings or like maybe was insensitive or was just didn't ring, didn't hit right for you, um not to just be permissive and let people be terrible to each other, but assuming coming into spaces assuming that that was not the way that you necessarily perceived it, that I necessarily perceived it, helps broadly.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We're going to close out our panel. For our guests in the room with us, thank you so much for being here with us. And if you're doing the festival this year, please help us keep our community safe as we navigate this new normal that we have here in Los Angeles. We'll be sending some emails out about ways that you can help protect political work in the fringe and be there for one another as we are yeah, navigating this. So thank you all so much. We will be in touch, and we're gonna keep making the world a little better, one fringe at a time, I hope. Thanks.